The night began like any other, quiet, predictable, and filled with the kind of tension that had become a constant in my life. I was sitting in my dimly lit living room in Springfield, Ohio, a small town where everyone knew everyone, and secrets rarely stayed hidden for long. The only light came from a single-floor lamp beside my armchair, casting a soft glow on the yellow notepad resting on my lap. I had been jotting down notes for hours, lost in my thoughts, when the doorbell rang. I glanced at the clock, 10:15 p.m. Too late for visitors, especially in a town like Springfield. My wife, Olivia, hadn't been home before midnight in months, so I knew it wasn't her. I set the notepad aside, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over me. It wasn't the kind of tiredness that came from work, it was the soul-crushing fatigue of a life that had slowly unraveled. I walked to the door, flipping on the outdoor and hallway lights as I went. Through the peephole, I saw 2 police officers standing on my porch. My stomach dropped. Cops at your door this late never meant good news. I took a deep breath and opened the door. What have I done this time? I tried to joke, but neither officer cracked a smile. The taller one, a man in his late 40s with a stern expression, spoke first. Are you Michael Carter? Yes, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Is your wife Olivia Carter? That's correct. Can I ask what this is about? The officers exchanged a glance, and the shorter one, a younger guy who looked like he'd just graduated from the academy, shifted uncomfortably. Your wife was injured tonight, the older officer said. She's been taken to Springfield General Hospital. I felt my chest tighten. Injured? How? Is she? I couldn't bring myself to finish the sentence. The older officer hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. She's currently in surgery. The doctors are doing everything they can. I leaned against the doorframe, my mind racing. Olivia, my wife of 12 years, the woman I'd once loved more than anything, was fighting for her life. And I had no idea why. Can you tell me what happened? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The younger officer spoke up this time. Your wife was found in a motel room with another man. His wife showed up and, well, she had a gun. I stared at them, trying to process what I'd just heard. Olivia had been shot by another woman, a woman whose husband she'd been sleeping with. The irony wasn't lost on me. Is he? I started to ask, but the older officer cut me off. He didn't make it. His wife emptied the clip into him and then turned the gun on your wife. She's lucky to be alive. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Olivia had been having an affair, and now she was lying in a hospital bed because of it. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but another part, the part that had been betrayed, couldn't muster any sympathy. Do you know who the man was? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. The older officer nodded. His name was Daniel Harris. His wife, Sarah Harris, is in custody. She confessed to the shooting. I nodded, feeling numb. Daniel Harris. The name meant nothing to me, but it was clear he'd meant something to Olivia. We need to ask you a few questions, the younger officer said, pulling out a notebook. Where were you this evening? I crossed my arms over my chest, feeling a surge of anger. I've been here all night. Working. Alone. If you're asking if I had anything to do with this, the answer is no. I didn't even know about the affair until tonight. The officers exchanged another glance, and the older one nodded. We'll need to verify that, but for now, we'll take your word for it. We'll be in touch if we have more questions. They turned to leave, but I stopped them. Wait. Is there anything else I should know? The older officer paused, his expression softening slightly. Your wife's condition is critical, but the doctors are optimistic. You might want to head to the hospital. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was ready to face Olivia, or the reality of what had happened. I stood in the doorway long after the officers had left, my mind spinning. Olivia was in surgery, fighting for her life, and I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to rush to the hospital, to be by her side like a good husband should. But another part, the part that had been shattered by her betrayal, wanted to stay far away. In the end, duty won out. I grabbed my keys, threw on a jacket, and drove to Springfield General Hospital. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes in small towns after midnight. The hospital parking lot was nearly empty, and the fluorescent lights in the lobby buzzed faintly as I walked in. The nurse at the front desk recognized me immediately. "Mr. Carter? Your wife is still in surgery. The doctor will be out to speak with you soon." I nodded and took a seat in the waiting room. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching into an eternity. I thought about Olivia, about the life we'd built together, the promises we'd made, and the lies she'd told. It had been 2 months since I'd first suspected something was wrong. Olivia had started coming home late, always with some excuse about work or girls' nights out. At first, I'd believed her. But then I noticed the little things, the way she'd avoid my eyes when she lied, the way she'd suddenly start dressing up for no reason, the way she'd become distant, like she was living a separate life. I'd hired a private investigator, Ethan Parker, to follow her. He'd been the one to uncover the affair, snapping photos of Olivia and Daniel Harris at the Maplewood Motel, a rundown place on the outskirts of town. The photos had arrived in a plain manila envelope, along with a detailed report of their meetings. I'd kept the envelope in my desk drawer, waiting for the right moment to confront her. But now, that moment might never come. The surgeon finally emerged, his face unreadable. "Mr. Carter?" I stood up, my heart pounding. "How is she?" "Your wife is stable," he said, his voice calm but firm. "The bullet missed her vital organs, but she lost a lot of blood. She's lucky to be alive." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Can I see her?" "Not yet. She's still in recovery, and we've given her a sedative. She'll likely sleep through the night. You can come back in the morning." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. Olivia was alive, but what would that mean for us? For our marriage? The next morning, I returned to the hospital. Olivia's parents, Robert and Margaret, were already there, sitting in the waiting room. They looked up when I walked in, their faces a mix of worry and anger. "Michael," Robert said, standing to shake my hand. "We heard what happened. How could this happen?" I didn't have an answer for him. How could I explain that their daughter had been shot by another woman because she'd been having an affair? Margaret hugged me tightly, her voice trembling. "Thank God she's alive. We were so worried." I nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. I hadn't called them last night, I'd been too overwhelmed. But they'd found out anyway, probably from the hospital. The nurse led us to Olivia's room. She was awake, her face pale and drawn, but her eyes lit up with anger when she saw me. "You," she spat, her voice weak but venomous. "You did this. You killed him." I froze, stunned by her accusation. "Olivia, I didn't, don't lie to me," she shouted, her voice rising. "You hated him. You hated us. You wanted him dead." The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Robert and Margaret stared at me, their expressions a mix of shock and confusion. "Olivia," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I didn't kill Daniel. His wife did. She caught you two together, and she shot him." "She shot you." Olivia's face crumpled, and she began to sob. "You're lying. You're lying." I turned to her parents, who looked like they'd just been hit by a truck. "I'm sorry you had to hear it like this," I said. "But Olivia was having an affair with Daniel Harris. His wife found out, and, well, you know the rest. Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Robert looked like he was about to collapse. Is this true? He asked, his voice shaking. Olivia didn't answer. She just cried, her sobs echoing through the room. The days that followed were a blur. Olivia remained in the hospital, recovering from her injuries, while I tried to piece together what was left of my life. The police had cleared me of any involvement in the shooting, but the emotional toll was far from over. I spent most of my time at home, avoiding the curious stares of neighbors and the endless stream of questions from friends. Springfield was a small town, and news traveled fast. Everyone knew about Olivia's affair, the shooting, and the fact that Daniel Harris was dead. I also had to deal with Sarah Harris, Daniel's wife. She was in police custody, awaiting trial, but her lawyer had reached out to me through my attorney, Laura Bennett. Sarah wanted to apologize, not just to Olivia, but to me as well. Do you want to meet her? Laura asked during one of our meetings. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to see the woman who had pulled the trigger, to ask her why she'd done it. But another part of me wasn't sure I could handle it. I don't know, I admitted. What would I even say to her? Laura shrugged. You don't have to say anything. Sometimes, it's enough just to listen. In the end, I agreed to meet Sarah. We met in a small, windowless room at the police station, with Laura by my side. Sarah was thinner than I'd expected, her face pale and drawn, her eyes hollow. She looked like a woman who had already been sentenced. Thank you for coming, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, unsure of what to say. I'm sorry, she continued, her voice breaking. I never meant to hurt your wife. I couldn't take it anymore. The lies, the betrayal, it was too much. I felt a pang of sympathy for her, despite everything. I knew what it felt like to be betrayed, to have your world turned upside down by someone you loved. I'm sorry too, I said finally. For what happened to Daniel? For what happened to you? Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. I just wanted him to stop. I wanted him to come back to me. But he wouldn't. And now he's gone. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Laura cleared her throat. We should go, she said gently. I stood up, feeling a strange sense of closure. Sarah had apologized, and in a way, so had I. But it didn't change what had happened. It didn't bring Daniel back, and it didn't fix my marriage. A few weeks later, Olivia was released from the hospital. She moved back in with her parents, and I filed for divorce. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. Our marriage had been broken long before the shooting, and there was no way to fix it. The divorce proceedings were messy, as they often are. Olivia wanted everything, the house, the car, even the dog we'd adopted together. But Laura was a shark in the courtroom, and she made sure I got a fair deal. You're not responsible for her choices, Laura reminded me during one of our meetings. You don't owe her anything. In the end, the judge awarded me the house and the car, while Olivia got half of our savings and the dog. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. After the divorce was finalized, I tried to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy. Springfield was a small town, and everyone seemed to have an opinion about what had happened. Some people pitied me, while others whispered behind my back, wondering if I'd known about Olivia's affair all along. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to keep my mind occupied. I also started seeing a therapist, Dr. Emily Harper, who helped me process everything that had happened. You've been through a lot, she said during one of our sessions. It's okay to feel angry, hurt, or even relieved. What matters is how you move forward. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed her. Moving forward felt impossible when the past kept pulling me back. One evening, as I was cleaning out the spare room, I found the manila envelope Ethan Parker had given me. Inside were the photos of Olivia and Daniel, along with the detailed report of their meetings. I hadn't looked at them since the night of the shooting, but now, I couldn't look away. The photos were grainy, but they were clear enough to see Olivia's face, her smile, her laughter, the way she looked at Daniel like he was the only person in the world. It hurt to see, but it also reminded me why I'd made the decision to leave. I burned the photos in the backyard, watching as the flames consumed the evidence of Olivia's betrayal. It felt like a symbolic gesture, a way to let go of the past and start fresh. Months passed, and life slowly returned to normal, or at least, a new version of normal. I started dating again, though it was awkward at first. I hadn't been on a date in over a decade, and the rules had changed. My first date was with a woman named Rachel, a teacher at the local elementary school. We met at a coffee shop, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of connection. "So, what's your story?" she asked, sipping her latte. I hesitated, unsure of how much to share. "It's complicated," I said finally. Rachel smiled. "Aren't we all?" We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. It was refreshing to be with someone who didn't know about Olivia or the shooting, someone who saw me for who I was now, not who I'd been. As the weeks went by, Rachel and I grew closer. She was kind, funny, and understanding, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. One evening, as Rachel and I were walking through the park, she turned to me and said, "I think I'm falling in love with you." I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," I admitted. It was a scary feeling, opening my heart to someone new after everything I'd been through. But it was also exhilarating, like stepping into the sunlight after a long, dark winter. As we walked hand in hand through the park, I realized that life wasn't about avoiding pain, it was about finding joy in spite of it. Olivia's betrayal had shattered me, but it had also given me the chance to rebuild myself into someone stronger, someone better. And as I looked at Rachel, her eyes sparkling in the fading light, I knew that I was ready to move forward, not just for her, but for myself.